Good local time. Thank you for virtually attending my presentation on addressing cognitive differences in the memorization of L2 vocabulary. This session is a more practical one where we'll be able to apply the theories that the featured speakers have been talking about. For this presentation, my learning target is that you, as participants, will be able to identify strategies to best address the cognitive diversity found in L2 learners in the areas of storing and retrieving vocabulary. At the end of this session, you should be able to answer the question, what strategies can you use to support diverse L2 learners in storing and retrieving vocabulary? Allow me to briefly introduce myself. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in linguistics from Stony Brook University in New York and a master's degree in English language from Chunam National University. I'm a national board certified teacher in English as a new language and also a 2019-2020 Fulbright teacher for global classrooms. So just a summary of some of my experience so you understand where I'm coming from. I've taught in the US public schools from preschool through 12th grade in North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas, in the US community college system, in a US proprietary intensive English program in California, with a US supplemental services provider. Also, in Korea, I've taught in a university English department, a university language center, and a private language school. I've also taught in Mexican private schools, grades 5 and 6, and high school. My present situation is I'm teaching in Texas in the United States. I teach at a public high school for grades 9 through 12. I teach in a special program called a Newcomer Academy. This means that my students are in their first year of school in the United States. They receive sheltered English language arts classes, as well as English language development classes. And then the rest of their schedule is a normal American high school student's schedule of math and science and social studies and electives. My students come from many different countries. My city is located 5 hours from the Mexican border, but by no means are all of my students Mexican, and not all of my students are Spanish speaking either. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the research basis for these activities. I'm going to speak about selecting vocabulary for instruction. I'm going to share 3 different strategies. The strategies I'm going to share are 7 steps, vocabulary links, and the method of loci. And then we'll come to a brief conclusion. We know by looking at the work of Baddeley and others, working memory is really a place for storage and manipulation of information that's necessary for complex cognitive activity. And this has several components: the phonological loop for verbal acoustic storage, the visual spatial sketchpad, the central executive, and the episodic buffer. The phonological loop is a temporary storage system, and really what is stored there can decay after just a couple of seconds. It can be refreshed, for example, through a subvocal rehearsal system. And we know because of the phonological loop that in choosing words to study, to learn, to teach, similarity of meaning is more important than phonological similarity. In the episodic buffer, this is where we store information And we try to bind together information from a variety of sources and modalities, putting them into chunks or episodes. Yuan says that working memory is really for temporary maintenance and manipulation of information during a cognitive task. This includes both storage and control functions, and really, there is a limit to the amount of information that can be processed in a cognitive task. And this is different for everyone. Working memory is all those cognitive resources that are necessary to temporarily store and process information during complex cognitive tasks. And we know from Segara and Hutchinson that tasks that deplete the working memory capacity result in reduced storage and slower processing. And this is where the struggle is for L2 learners. Working memory is associated with L2 lexical retrieval, and the processing demands affect the information knowledge. Individuals who have a higher capacity for working memory tend to be more accurate at comprehension. There's a great range of differences in different learners. So just to summarize this, working memory is not just short-term memory. It's all the resources that we use to store and maintain and process information during a complex cognitive activity. Learners of English demonstrate cognitive differences in their capacities for storing L2 vocabulary. We also know when learners engage in tasks that deplete the existing working memory capacity, like L2 lexical retrieval, typically they're going to process information slower. And sometimes we don't have the luxury of processing it slower. So some of the methods that we're going to look at, we're looking at methods that incorporate repeated exposure to new information in verbal, visual, and spatial forms, and looking at a variety of methods and techniques to give those diverse learners, they give them the ability to store and manipulate information to complete complex cognitive activities in their second language. So with these ideas in mind, next I want to talk about selecting vocabulary. So how are we going to do this? What is important in selecting vocabulary? We know that in selecting vocabulary for instruction, it's important to select words that really are going to benefit learners and make the most efficient use of their working memory. And as I said earlier, in grouping words for instruction, it's generally preferred to group terms by similarity in meaning rather than phonological similarity for increased retention. In talking about vocabulary, we often talk about Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And I'm going to admit this is kind of my interpretation of these three tiers. It might be different than you hear from other experts. Tier 1 is that basic vocabulary. Sometimes we say Dolch words, sight words, the general service list, first 1,000 words, like the basic words that everyone should know first. When we talk about Tier 2, this is very specifically academic vocabulary across the content areas. Multiple meaning words, phrases, things that might be found on the academic word list. These are words that learners are going to see again and again in many different contexts, but sometimes they have a different meaning depending upon the context. And Tier 3 words are content-specific vocabulary, what we might call off-list words. The vocabulary that is crucial if a learner is going to be studying content like science, history in English. These are words they might not encounter outside of that very specific academic context. One tool for selecting vocabulary is Tom Cobb's Web Vocabulary Profiler. So here, I took a world history exam and copied and pasted it into the Web Vocabulary Profiler. It's going to break out the words into these 3 tiers of vocabulary. So here we see tier 1, the first 1,000 most frequent words in the English language. You can also see how it's broken down into function words, first 500 content words, and second 500 content words. Here we're looking at tier 1, words that everyone should know before going on to learn to study more advanced vocabulary. Then we look at the tier 2 vocabulary, the academic word list vocabulary from Coxhead's list. And here I'm finding words that students are going to see again and again in different contexts. You'll see words like achieve and affect, conflict, contribute, maintain. These words have different meanings depending on the context. Here at tier 2 is where we're going to focus a lot of my instructional time. These are words that students are going to see again and again in academic English across different disciplines and different domains. Then finally here is what are considered off-list words. These are the very specific words, the vocabulary you need to study in a particular academic field. So here we have words like bureaucracy, dynasty, overthrow, sultanate. These are words that are very important when you're studying world history, but you might never see these words outside of the context of world history. These are words that I wouldn't spend a lot of time on as the English teacher. I think these words would be best taught by the history teacher who's teaching in the English language medium. Here's a QR code that will take you to Tom Cobb's Web Vocabulary Profiler. Another source for selecting academic vocabulary is from a company called Lead Forward, the Lead Forward Academic Vocabulary. This is somewhat Texas specific, but if you are looking for a list of what students at any particular grade level, what words, what vocabulary they should have to be able to receive instruction in English or to be in an even playing field with native English speakers, this is an excellent source for that kind of vocabulary. So I opened up the high school biology academic vocabulary. And here we have terms that are very specific for biology that students would need to know in English. Lysome, nucleus, synthesis, thymine. These are words that are very important in biology, but you are rarely going to encounter these words outside of the academic content area of biology. And here is the QR code you can follow to access the Lead Forward academic vocabulary lists. And these are freely available to everyone. So the first strategy I'm going to talk about is 7 steps. This strategy was developed by Dr. Margarita Calderon. I first encountered this strategy in her workshop, Excel, Expediting Reading Comprehension for English Language Learners. This is only one small part of this entire strategy that she has. Some of her other publications include Teaching Reading to English Learners grades 6 through 12 and teaching reading and comprehension to English learners K-5. Calderon is talking about, well, why do we teach vocabulary? Why is it important? We know that vocabulary knowledge strongly correlates with reading comprehension. And reading comprehension correlates with procedural and content knowledge. Successful reading comprehension really depends on knowing between 90% and 95% of the words contained in a text. If you can figure out about 90% of the words, okay, you can gain knowledge, you can learn information from this text. If you only get like, 75 or 80% of the words, it's going to be very difficult to comprehend what you're reading. Calderon also says that knowing words means explicit instruction, not just exposure. Really? Students need 12 production opportunities before they can be said to truly own that word. So here are the 7 steps. Say the word. The teacher says the word, and the learners repeat 3 times. The teacher reads and shows the learners the word in context from the text. The teacher provides the dictionary definition in formal English, so that native speaker college level dictionary definition. Then the teacher explains the meaning using learner-friendly language and examples. The teacher highlights one difficult aspect, whether it's grammar, spelling, false cognates, multiple meaning words, word parts. The teacher leads a speaking activity to elicit the use of the word and help the learners develop the concept. And finally, the teacher explains how and when the learners will use the word in future reading or writing activities or assessments. And you can see that this is very teacher-centered. This is the instructor is providing direct instruction in vocabulary. But we know how important vocabulary is. I'm going to give an example from a lesson I taught my own students. This is 2nd and 3rd grade elementary school students. In their textbook, they were reading paired passages, one fiction, a fable, and one nonfiction, informational text. The first story was the fable, The Fox in the Moon.
Convince.
We repeat the word 3 times. Here we have an example from the text. My friend tried to convince me that there's a frog in the moon. And here's another example. The fox convinced the mole to go with him to the moon. Here we have the academic dictionary definition. Convince means to cause someone to believe that something is true, or to cause someone to agree to do something. Ooh, right from the beginning, the learners are exposed to that higher level academic language. Now let's see the learner-friendly definition. Convince means to make a person think like you think, or do what you want to do. So here, let's clear up the confusion of different related words. So we know that convince is a verb. A related noun is conviction. It can mean what a person believes. It's a multiple meaning word, but this is how we can use it in this context. A related adjective is convincing. It can mean a person's words or actions make you agree with them. Here is where students have their first opportunity to use the word. A very short discussion question and a sentence stem if learners need that level of support. What is something your friends might convince you to do? My friends might convince me to. This can be something where like they turn and talk with a shoulder partner, or it can be something that they're talking in a group chat, or even in Flipgrid or another tech tool. But this is their first opportunity to actually use that word. What's the purpose of learning this word? Well, you will use convince to summarize the story you will read.
Idea.
Next word, repeat 3 times after the teacher. In context from the story, hey, I've got an idea. An idea is a thought, plan, or suggestion about what to do. An idea is something a person thinks or imagines. Let's clear up some confusion. An idea can be good or bad. This word that looks almost the same, ideal, is an adjective that means something is excellent or perfect. Have you ever had an idea that turned out to be wrong or mistaken? Now they have an opportunity to use that word. Why is this important? You will contrast the characters in the story and talk about their ideas. Now we're moving into the informational text.
Mountain.
Repeat 3 times after the teacher. It looks like it's a discussion question. It's actually from the text. Have you ever climbed a tall mountain? Academic dictionary definition. A mountain is an area of land that rises very high above the land around it, and that is higher than a hill. Learner-friendly definition. A mountain is a very high place. It is higher than a hill. Ooh, now let's look at some figurative language. A mountain can also mean a very large amount of something. I have mountains of homework to do. Here is the discussion question. Have you ever climbed a mountain? Where was it? Who did you climb with? And you see the discussion questions are getting a little bit more involved. They're sharing their personal experience while they practice this vocabulary word. If they need the support of a sentence stem, here it is. I once climbed a mountain in, name a place with, name the people. You will read about how mountains are created or formed.
Meteorite.
Here's an example in context from the nonfiction science text that they're going to read. Rocks fly through space all the time. When they hit the surface of the moon, they are called meteorites. Here is your definition. A meteorite is a piece of rock or metal that has fallen to the ground from outer space. a little bit simpler, learner-friendly definition. A meteorite is a rock that flies through space and hits the land. Okay, here's some vocabulary confusion, and you see how we're developing the concepts contained within the nonfiction science text. A meteorite reaches the surface of the Earth. A meteor burns up when it enters the Earth's atmosphere. Ooh, here's a discussion question asking learners to make a prediction and using this new vocabulary. What do you think might happen if a meteorite hit Earth? If a meteorite hit Earth, you will read about how meteorites change Earth's surface.
Crater.
Here we see the word in context in a sentence from the text that they will read. Meteorites make dents in the surface of the moon called craters. A crater, here's our definition. A crater is a large round hole in the ground made by the explosion of a bomb or by something falling from the sky or the area on top of a volcano that is shaped like a bowl. When something hits the moon, it makes a crater. A crater is shaped like a bowl. Okay, here is a local example that's confusing. You can see a crater formed by a meteorite in Odessa, Texas. But it's called the Odessa Meteor Crater, but of course, it was formed by a meteorite. Here's an example from a Virginia context. A crater can also be made on a battlefield by a bomb, like in Petersburg, Virginia. You will read an informational text to learn what scientists see when they observe craters on the moon. In the times that we are living, luckily, this strategy works really well. It translates easily into virtual instruction. You might have to tweak the discussion question part a little bit, do it in a different modality. Really, there should be no more than 5 words in one vocabulary direct instruction session, and really no more than 5 minutes in one practice session. So if the timer is running and you get to 5 minutes and they're so engaged and you only got 3 words done, that's okay, come back to it. This is a strategy that I would use for like 5 minutes at the beginning of every lesson. This strategy is valuable because it's an opportunity for explicit instruction. Learners are getting that repeated exposure to the vocabulary items that you carefully selected. And there are multiple opportunities for production practice. And with this kind of direct instruction, it really brings together vocabulary information from a variety of modalities. I have anecdotal information that this works really well. I was doing the exact same presentation of vocabulary that I just showed you, and my students were kind of misbehaving. This wasn't typical for them. They were just, not doing what I expected them to do. And suddenly I realized, wait a minute, they actually know this vocabulary. They're bored because they've already got it. And I had this moment of comprehension and went and gave them a vocabulary quiz. And wow, yes, they did know the words. Once you prepare it, it doesn't take a lot of time. It does take preparation on the teacher's part before class, but it's extremely effective when students get this kind of explicit instruction of vocabulary. The next strategy I'd like to talk about is the LINKS vocabulary strategy developed by Edwin Ellis. So this was originally developed as part of the University of Kansas Strategic Instruction Model, and you can get information there. This strategy was developed for students with learning disabilities, but as we know, English learners, any second language learners, have a wide variety of cognitive differences, and this strategy works for them too. We know that success in second language content classes depends on learners understanding what they hear and read, learners being able to speak about content, and learners being able to answer test questions about content. The purpose of this strategy is to make students active in learning the vocabulary that they need to acquire and to express content knowledge, and also to enable students to use memory strategies for learning vocabulary. This one is much more student-centered. This is Ellis's explanation of the strategy. So in this strategy, different pieces of knowledge are linked together as if they were on a chain. And we know that many times, if you remember the information of one of the links on the chain, then you'll remember the information in the other links that connect to it. So we applied this strategy for a word that you need to remember to create a strong chain, to create a strong connection between the word and its meaning. The stronger the links are between pieces of information, the easier it is for learners to remember them. If the links are weak, it's going to be much more difficult to remember. So here are some of the situations where Ellis would apply this strategy. When we see that students are exhibiting differences in the area of vocabulary learning, this strategy is just one of many strategies, but this enables them to become more active vocabulary learners. It's not a passive set and get like the 7 steps. We know that students exhibit working memory differences, and this strategy gives them another memory device to help aid their memory. We know that students exhibit differences connecting new learning to current knowledge, and this strategy facilitates their memories by making these really explicit connections. And finally, we see students who do very poorly on tests where the mastery of vocabulary is emphasized. We're all given a vocabulary test. This strategy is really enabling students to be able to perform well on this type of test. This is Ellis's explanation of how to do the LINKS vocabulary strategy. So you're going to take an index card, a memory card, divide both sides in half by drawing lines across the middle. Then you're going to write the vocabulary word to be learned on the top half of one side and circle it. Next, you write the parts of the definition that you need to remember on the top of the other side. This may involve some dictionary work, but it's also choosing only the most important parts of the definition, not copying the entire dictionary entry. Next, you write a reminding word on the bottom half of the first side. The reminding word should be similar to the vocabulary word in either spelling or sound at either the beginning or the end of the word. Next, you write a linking story on the bottom half of the second side. I like my linking stories to be a little bit longer than what Ellis suggests. And I think it should be at least one complete sentence that contains both the targeted vocabulary word and also the reminding word. And finally, the student draws the linking picture on the bottom half of the second side. The linking story and the linking picture go together. So this is Ellis's research in using this strategy. Ellis had two classes, Class A and Class B. Both classes took a social studies vocabulary test, a pretest, and then Class A did the links vocabulary strategy. And then both classes took a post-test. So we can see that students in Class A, some of the students were students with learning disabilities, and some of them did not have learning disabilities. While the regular students in Class A knew 84% of the vocabulary, the students with a learning disability really didn't. And Class B, everyone kind of got it at 86%. After Class A used the links vocabulary strategy, look at their growth. The students with learning disabilities went from 53% to 77%. But look, this strategy is best practices for all kinds of students. The students who didn't have a learning disability, okay, they started out at 84%. That's not bad. After this strategy, they grew to 92%. So this isn't just a remediation strategy. This can be an enrichment strategy for all learners. Whereas the students in Class B, before reading the text, okay, they knew the vocabulary at 86%, but then they actually went down. They weren't engaged with the vocabulary, and at the end of this, they'd lost 1 percentage point. So we can see from Ellis's research, this is a strategy that is going to benefit a lot of different types of learners. Here are some live examples from my students. So remember, these are all high school students in their first year in the United States. The word this student was learning was offer, and his reminding word was office. So he has a definition. Ask if someone would like something or give someone the opportunity to have something. So here is his story. People offer money to an officer to not receive a ticket. For not getting a ticket? No. Hey, it's a kind of funny story, and that's going to make this stick in his mind. So he has a definition, a story, and a visual image that he created to help him remember this word. And these are obviously not, my perfect exemplar students. I chose these examples to show you the process that the students are going through. And I'm certainly not grading anyone on the quality of the story, definitely not the quality of their drawing. This is their creative process. So this student was going to learn the word exchange. And first, his reminding word was like a synonym, trade. He's like, no. And then his reminding word was change. And then he's like, wait, okay, my reminding word is going to be excited. So here's his story. I am so excited to exchange money to buy good things in America. And there's his picture to go with his story. The word is population, the reminding word nation. In one nation, the population is really big. The vocabulary word is practice. He didn't circle it. His reminding word is justice. You practice justice in my village. The vocabulary word is refuse. And again, he was kind of confused, right? He was like, well, the reminding word is refuse. No, the reminding word needs to be different. So here's the story. Sergio refused to reduce his consumption of junk food, and he died. It was Sergio who made this card. No one's bullying anyone here. The vocabulary word being studied is hungry, and the reminding word is angry. One day, a very hungry person is walking, and a person has food. He's very angry. He has food, and he wouldn't give him any. Instead, the reminding word inside. Instead of going to school, I stay inside my house. Actually, this was done in February before we went into quarantine and lockdown. So this is Ellis's basic strategy, and I'm going to show you some extensions that we do with this. So what you see here, if I had a list of 5 vocabulary words, I would assign them kind of randomly to students in the class. And then when their Links vocabulary cards were complete, I take them up and put a ring around like 5 cards with the same word. And this is what I call a seated gallery walk. It's a little bit different from a traditional gallery walk. Each group receives a set of cards for one word. And I do look at the cards and make sure that the quality is good and make sure that the student's name is not present on the card. So a small group of maybe 3 to 5 reads all the cards on the same word and selects the best one. They use their phone to take a picture of the best card, and this is their study guide. This is what we did at first. And then I saw that although we have a BYOD campus, bring your own device, students are encouraged and allowed to bring their phones to class, but some students didn't have a phone or were on restrictions and had their phone taken away. And they were like, well, can you just send me the picture you took? They'd ask their friends. So we took it one step further. I had group members post what they decided was the picture of the best card to the website Padlet to create a class study guide. So now, even if you don't really know, your class members have chosen what they consider to be the best example of the card. And I set a timer or I play a song, and after 3 minutes, the group passes the set of cards on to the next group. Here's an example of the Padlet. If you follow the QR code, you should be able to see this live example of my students' Padlet. This is an activity that actually lends itself pretty well to virtual instruction. So I've created a template in Google Slides that you can make a copy of and share with your students if you'd like to try this strategy in a virtual instruction setting. The vocabulary word is hobby, and her reminding word is holiday. So here's the story. My hobby is listening to music for the Christmas holiday. And she didn't create, but she did source an appropriate image. The word is expand. The reminding word is expire. The linking story. I forgot my milk in the car and it expired and it exploded because it expanded. Ooh, who hasn't had that happen? Intelligence. Here's the reminding word, independence. The woman has independence because she has intelligence. So some teacher tips in using this strategy with your own learners in your own context, the reminding word should be similar in sound or in spelling. So some students might need to use a dictionary or a rhyming dictionary to get started looking for a reminding word. I think the linking story should be at least one complete sentence, and the linking story should contain both the target word and the reminding word. I'm a little bit more demanding than Ellis here. And if the linking story can evoke strong emotion, that helps to make it memorable. Some of the benefits of this strategy, it's a very personalized learning strategy. And hopefully it's a strategy that learners will be able to transfer and use in their autonomous vocabulary learning, where learners have different sources of information about the word. They have visual information, they have linguistic information, information from several different sources to try to store this word so they can access it again when they need it in the future. The final strategy that I'm going to share with you is called the method of loci or memory palace. This is a strategy that's been used since ancient Roman and Greek times. So the first record of this we have is from Cicero, and he said that a poet developed this. In fact, Simonides of Chios was the sole survivor of a building collapse during a dinner he attended. And everyone else died, but this one person was able to identify who died in that collapse, even though their bodies were completely crushed, because he had remembered the locations where all the guests were sitting. This is the story, according to Cicero. So this was a very important method in ancient Roman and Greek oratory, because people would memorize and give speeches that lasted for hours and hours and hours. And it was really looked down upon to be reading from a script. It should look kind of extemporaneous. So these ancient orators would mentally place the key points of their speech in locations along a familiar route through a city or through their palace. While they're giving the speech, they would mentally walk along the same journey through the memory palace and retrieve the item that represents the next key point that they were going to talk about. And this is really one of the most popular mnemonic systems up until about the mid-1600s. And then people had other ideas. This is the process for the method of loci. Think of a place that you know well, such as your own house. And within that place, visualize a series of locations in the place in logical order. My students have just arrived in the United States. For some of them, it's a great upheaval. So I encourage them to either use their current home or a past home. I gave a model. My example was using my grandmother's house. So think of a place you know well and visualize a series of locations in the place in a logical order. So like picture the path that you would normally take in your house to get like from the front door to the back door. Begin at the front door, proceed through each room in turn. And as you enter that location, move logically and consistently in that room, like from one side of the room to the other. Think about, visualize each piece of furniture, because that's another location in the room. Place each item, each vocabulary word that you want to remember at one of the locations. And when you want to remember these things and retrieve them and put them back into your active memory, Visualize your house and go through it room by room. Each item is associated with a specific location in your house, and it should like spring to mind as you mentally make your way through your home. Really, this isn't a method that I can measure or observe in my students. I actually asked one to kind of draw his memory palace for me. And so he's going around the room to the left, and each room is actually a chapter in our book. So I asked him to store the things that he needs to remember for that chapter in that room. So this is not necessarily something that you draw. This is something that you do mentally, but I kind of wanted to be able to see what his thought process was as we practice this method. So this is a good memory strategy because it activates the visual spatial sketch pad. Ooh, that place. Okay, I'm walking. Oh, that word, I remember that. And this is really a way to store and maintain vocabulary information. So even if it's not there in the short-term memory when you need it, oh, you have a place to go back and get that vocabulary information. So I hope that we have met the learning target in this session, that now you can identify strategies to best address the cognitive diversity found in L2 learners in the areas of storing and retrieving vocabulary. So no one strategy is like a perfect match for every learner, but here I've introduced a variety of different strategies, and I use them all in my classroom. And at the end of the semester, I give them a task where they have to use one of these strategies to remember and recall and use their new vocabulary. Are you prepared to answer this question? What strategies can you use to support diverse L2 learners in storing and retrieving vocabulary? So the comment and discussion board is open. Please feel free to post your comments and questions, and I'll come back and answer them at the end of this conference. Information to contact me, my email address, my school website, and my Fulbright website. Thank you so much for spending your time with me in this session, and I hope it's been useful to you. And please feel free to reach out by any method if you have questions or you want more information or you have an idea for a global collaboration. Please, my information is here. Thank you very much.